the behavioral economics background you have, and then you just mentioned you get to make the decisions now. That's a very fascinating combination, right? Because behavioral economics, so much of it is about decision making and how we arrive at decisions and the things that influence us. What have you found most influences a ticket buyer?
When they decide they want to go to an event, they go. Tickets are not as price sensitive as I think people would have previously thought. That's why actually you'll see some of the data that we have is that tickets are changing price less often now. There used to be these hyper dynamic systems that would just every second be changing price just for the sake of changing price. And we see just far less of that now. If a ticket doesn't sell, it's probably not because of the price. One of the biggest data points that showed that was just in their buying behavior, in that the last few days prior to an event, you've historically seen decay in pricing. But oftentimes that's because on the secondary market, who's the supplier? Mostly a professional reseller who bought the ticket and they just want to liquidate because that asset is expiring. In reality, what we've seen is that if you hold the price, the buyers are still there. You know, in those times, right during schedule release or early on in the sales cycle, the buyers made the decision to go to the event. Maybe it's a football, team that's playing an away game and you're going to schedule a trip. But those last few days, that's not when you're price shopping. That's when you've decided to go to a game and you're going to find the best price and best location that, fits your budget. So price isn't as much of an indicator of demand as we used to think, which has been very fascinating. Now it's share of the wallet. And as I mentioned, what else are they spending money on? Is it other live events, in a time of, hyperinflation, which fortunately we're not in anymore. People are having to make difficult decisions. The whole idea of live events is interesting because, people will go broke before giving up their season tickets. They're just so passionate about it as part of who they are. So share of wallet is hypercritical. And then I think it's them deciding if the event is something they really want to see. So one of the trends we've seen, it's been talked about even prior to the pandemic, is the high demand events are just much more in demand and the low demand events are harder than ever to sell. You could have a NHL game on a weekday of two poor performing teams. You couldn't pay 20,000 people to go to those events. And so, that brings in this whole pricing strategy around what is optimal. And then you've got the Taylor Swifts that, you're paying $6,500 to go to an event. You'll never convince me that any live performer is worth $6,500. But when you have 3 nights at 60,000 seat venue and 3 million people who want to go, price is the price. So it's a lot around, do they really want to go? What else are they spending their money on? And time is kind of the other, I'd say, variable is do they have the availability to do that?
Has the data taught you anything about the differences between sports and something like concerts or theater? Are there major differences between how the ticketing market kind of evolves in those two different spaces?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference, particularly in team sports, is that it's very opponent driven as opposed to primary performer driven. So if there is an artist, that demand for the most part follows them around the country. You can kind of compare an away team as a, artist in that sense, right? In the NHL, Connor McDavid, he's going to come through the NHL and every time he plays in the building for the first time is probably going to be one of their higher tiered events, regardless of who the home team is. So I think that's the big difference. Stage configurations throw a wrinkle into trying to understand some of the data. Line of sight has just become very critical. Consumers have become much smarter. I think part of that is because interactive seat maps have become a common occurrence in a lot of markets to help educate some of those consumers. The line of sight's kind of a big difference is the actual configuration, the venue changes, artist versus a sports team or performance. Day a week, pretty consistent. Friday, Saturday, great. Tuesday, Wednesday, not so great. No surprise there. I think that's the biggest thing is it's just that the demand follows the performer, not the team.